Welcome to the Forge, my wanton wildlings. I'm your creepsmith, and I hope you like my work.
Hey wildlings, you gotta love being right down in it, so deep in the setting and the people that you're dying to see where this all goes. And then you see it, the spark that'll point you to where to look, what to pay attention to. So, back into it we go, with 9 Mother, 9 Horse, 9 Eyes, 9, and the Flesh Interface series. So, where were we? 46th post. Coming back online. I call it coming back online. That moment when you first come out of a drunken blackout. It's always frightening. Where am I? What is this neighborhood? What happened to my face? Where's my wallet? Some people, when they drink enough to disable their short-term memory, immediately collapse into an immobile heap. This is nature's fail-safe, but I lack this feature. I can walk and talk and carry a tune, yet I have no idea what's going on. I have never come back online to find myself up to any good. I've never emerged from a blackout to find that I've built a convenient spice rack or delivered a moving speech about women's rights. It's always been some fucking calamity. The last time I came back online, I was standing in my front yard, having a conversation with my parents. Even in my tottering state, I knew this couldn't be a good thing. I had no idea what we were talking about. Why were we talking about it on the front lawn? At night? What time was it? Hoping for a clue, I waited for something to come out of my mouth, and here it was. Didn't you notice I never left my room? I've been living with you for 6 months. I think I've seen each of you twice. Oh, this was bad. I knew I shouldn't be saying something like this. It sounded terribly confessional. Ever since I'd gotten fired and moved back in with my parents, I'd been holed in my childhood bedroom, secretly drinking and basking in an unremitting sense of personal shame. But this was all supposed to be secret. As far as my parents knew, I was freelancing and getting back on my feet. This mad scene, was not part of that narrative. We were giving you your privacy. We didn't know you were getting drunk up there, my mother said. This conversation was out of control. I should just tell them I'm going back to bed. I should calmly bid them a good night. So I said, "Of course I'm getting drunk. Fuck! I've been drinking every goddamn day for the last 10 years. What the fuck else would I be doing?" This was a poor choice of words. This was not how one calmly bids others a good night. Oh, the look on my poor mother's face. That look stayed with me. That look, the fallen face of a tired old woman, stayed with me as I lay in bed that night. It stayed with me as the alcohol wore off, as the night turned into queasy morning, as the hands began to shake. The brain tingle set in as the hell whispers began, as I waited for them to go to work so I could sneak a bit of relief from the liquor cabinet. As the awful day wore on, as we talked that next night, as I packed my stuff up, as I went off to rehab the next day. My mother is almost 70. She is small and stooped and old. When did she get so old? I just thought I would be something by now. 33 years old. I thought I would have something to show her, something to give back, something to make her proud. I thought I'd be a man, not just a drunken failure. All those little soccer practices she took me to, all the swim lessons and therapy and errands and effort and love. What was it for? So I could be a drunken sack of shit? Why was I so fucked up? Why did I require shore leave levels of liquor to operate properly? As I lay in bed in the rehab that first night, listening to the occasional moans of the other patients, I asked myself these questions and others. Soon, I found myself returning to the question that I'd been asking my entire life. The one I always retreated to in moments of self-pity, the one that seemed to hold some key to my dysfunction, the one I'd always been afraid to ask my mom. What about that one summer when you were dead? 47th post. Under the weather. The next day, I felt under the weather. The vivid dreams of the previous night had left my mind feeling dull and exhausted. As soon as I left my quarters, I was greeted with the news that one of our Ukrainians had gone mad during the night and attempted to attack Dr. Engel's team in their quarters. It was none other than the one who had brought me the strange skull fragment. After shooting him, they had come to the conclusion that he had somehow ingested some of their magical chemical, which they referred to as the Swiss invention. Engels insisted that I make an announcement to the camp. Anyone found ingesting this chemical under any circumstances, whether by intention or accident, will be summarily shot, regardless of whether they are prisoner or Hiwi or even SS. This was by order of the High Command. At this, I was forced to admit to myself what was already obvious. I had somehow been dosed with the chemical handling the bone fragment. My dreams had been a reaction to the poisoning. Looking into Engel's cold blue eyes, I tried to deduce the consequences of confessing to him. Despite his agreeable haughtiness, he seemed like a rational, efficient man with an appropriate love of duty and country. I had no doubt that he would murder me without hesitation. I decided to keep my little nocturnal epiphany to myself. Naturally, my curiosity in Engel's project had been aroused again. He apparently was working with a chemical which could induce temporary madness. The value of such chemical was obvious, but what of the bizarre bone fragment? Where had it come from? I couldn't help but feel that this creature, whatever it was somehow connected to the vision of the monstrous, bloody mother. Again and again her blood face appeared in my mind, her filmy eyes gazing down at me, inhuman and imperious. I attempted to contact the Jew again, but after our conversation, Dr. Engel's team guarded him jealously. He was never left alone. As the hot summer days went by, my curiosity about the matter grew to obsessive proportions. The monstrous mother visited me several more times in my dreams, of the normal variety this time, but no less vivid or disturbing. I began surreptitiously observing Engel's laboratory, which was guarded day and night, and I asked some of my men to do the same. To our knowledge, the bloody packages had ceased to emerge from this inn, but something stranger began to happen. This new phenomenon was presumably occurring at all hours, but was imperceptible in the bustle of the day when men were about and the gas chambers were operating. Only at night, and only when the fires were burning quietly, could it be perceived. I first observed it shortly before dawn one muggy morning. As ridiculous as it might sound for me to be skulking about my own camp, I did just that, slipping along the wall of the new gas chamber to come within a short distance of the laboratory. There, I witnessed what others had reported to me. At fixed intervals, a sound emerged from the laboratory. It was very quiet, but not just my imagination. A creaking sound. The sound that many old houses and structures make as the materials shrink and swell from the temperature and moisture, but this came very regularly, every 4 or 5 seconds. Slowly, a realization crept upon me. The building was breathing, steadily, in and out. It was breathing. It was alive. This realization, which I will admit was more of an unconfirmed intuition, filled me with a dread so strong that tears came to my eyes. There was something enormous and alive inside that building. The sight of death, bloody death beyond most imaginations, had left me unmoved. But the sight of life, this new and unnatural life pressing against the walls of the building, was enough to chill me. Again, I saw the face of the unholy mother in my mind. I saw her filmy eyes. I saw a slight smile form on her lips between the streams of blood. That night, I could not sleep. Fortunately, the next day was our weekly day off, and I was able to spend most of the day in my quarters. It was abnormally, intolerably hot and humid. My thoughts followed disorderly circles around the revolting image of the mother, and I felt as if I was being revisited by the temporary madness brought on by the so-called Swiss invention. I had long loathed life at the camp, but had accepted it as a tolerable hardship. But now the constant smell of the burning sickened me. I felt I could take no more. That afternoon, some of my men decided to go to a nearby lake for a swim, and on a whim, I accompanied them. I needed a reprieve from the heat. At the lake, I eased myself into the cool water and floated idly, watching the clouds pass overhead. Here, there was nothing but the gentle twittering of nature. It had been here before our murderous camp had been built, and it would be here long after, gentle and peaceful. I'd been in the water for just a few minutes when I received the news. A group of prisoners had broken into the armory, smuggled weapons out, and a full-scale uprising occurred back at the camp. The rest of the day was a whirlwind. We raced back to the camp, and I found myself personally trading fire with the prisoners, as all about buildings burned and everything was chaos. We called for reinforcements, managed to subdue the camp, and set out into the woods to catch the escapees. A fair number were intercepted, but over 100 had escaped. This was an unmitigated disaster. Coming back to the camp after the hunt, I had only to look around at the faces of my men to know that I was now in a position of total disgrace. As calamitous thoughts raced through my head, I found myself walking toward Engel's laboratory. Deep black soot stains around the front door showed me that the interior had been burnt out. All around the entrance lay bodies of Engel's team, their white coats dyed in fresh red. They had been massacred. Engel himself had been stabbed or shot several times, and his throat had been slashed. And then there was the Jew. The Jew lay on the ground with one of my SS men standing over him, holding a rifle with a fixed bayonet. The Jew's abdomen had been bisected, and his bowels spilled out all over the ground. They were now caked with dust. A few feet from him lay a kitchen knife. Apparently he had stabbed Engel's whole team to death before being opened up by the bayonet. To kill half a dozen men like this was no mean feat. My officer stood with one of his boots atop a loop of the Jew's intestines, sneering at him. Remarkably, the Jew was still alive and aware. When I approached, he lifted his head, and I, for the last time, found myself caught in his strange gaze. We stood like this for a moment, staring at each other, inexplicable emotions flooding my mind. The Jew opened his mouth and croaked something. A bloody foam spilled out over his lips. He tried again. "Water," he said. I quickly instructed my man to get some water. He scoffed, and I clouted him about the head and screamed at him. He scurried off and returned a moment later with a large ladle of water. I took it and stooped down over the Jew and carefully tipped the ladle to his lips, letting him drink. He drank, carefully. I wiped the bleeding foam away from his lips. All the while I could not fathom why I was doing this except by the commandment of the man's pleading eyes. His lips trembled, and he attempted to speak. I cradled his head and leaned close to hear his words. "I know this is not good. I've killed them. But others, you must..." I waited for him to continue, but he did not. "Must what?" I asked. "You've seen her. Your dream is the future." "The mother?" I asked. "The bloody woman?" "There is still time to stop her. You must... And just like that, the life fled from him, and the glimmer in his eyes went dull. I set his head gently on the ground again and stood up. I looked to the burned-out entrance of the laboratory. It was now unguarded. I could walk right in. A chill went through me at the thought, but I knew that I must. I walked to the entrance. Just inside was a curtain made of tarpaulin, concealing the interior. The smell of charred meat and petrol, which normally pervaded the entire camp, which had been giving me headaches and slowly driving me mad all the past year, was especially sickeningly strong here. With a trembling hand, I pulled back the curtain and looked inside. 48th post. Surely. There, mostly hidden in the darkness, was a great, inexplicable monstrosity. Everything had been burned and blackened, but still I could see human shapes and forms, arms, fingers, faces, jawbones, teeth, eye sockets, all burned and reduced to ash clinging to bone. But this was no pile of burned bodies. I had seen piles of burned bodies. I had seen mountains of burned bodies. This was something different. Human parts were coming out of the walls and the floor and ceiling. Arms and legs hung like stalactites. Faces came out of the floor. They were fused together in ways that could not be possible. At seeing this, I was filled with the strongest possible urge to run away, to back out of the awful laboratory and run for my life. But I heard the Jew's final words again. "You must," and knew this to be a command. I went inside. As the curtain closed behind me, I was enveloped in almost total darkness. Bones cracked beneath my boots. Near the back I saw a shaft of light where one of the old doors had been sealed up, but had come partially open again. I walked towards it, stepping over unspeakable crunching shapes, brushing past nightmare forms. I reached out to the crack and pulled back a board which was covering the door. Though I was not able to rip it free, I pulled it loose enough to let in a considerable amount of light, enough to reveal what sat at the back of the laboratory. As a child, I once went to a zoo in Vienna where I saw an elephant skull. Looking at the objects now before me, I was reminded of this long ago moment and of how I had spent maybe half an hour staring at the skull from every angle, and how titillated by its enormousness, its impossible alienness, and its unsettling similarity to what was familiar and human. Before me was a large obloid shape, almost as tall as me, stippled with hundreds of what looked like eye sockets. The lower portion consisted of a complicated structure that resembled several sets of jaws, each with hundreds or thousands of teeth of all different kinds, including molars, incisors, canines, even animal teeth, some of them normal size, some as big as my fist. The center of the shape was split vertically, and inside was a set of curving bone tubes that seemed to fill the interior. I stood there in the charred darkness, staring at this thing, this blasphemous, alien thing, while my mind filled with images of the awful dream mother and the final gasping words of the Jew. There is still time to stop her. His commandment became strangely clear to me. This thing that the scientists were attempting to create, whatever it was, must not be allowed to exist. It was an abomination. Engel and his team were dead, but there were others working on the project. It was secretive enough that the essential personnel would be few in number, the lab in Switzerland, a few top scientists, perhaps. That was the entirety of it. It would not be easy, but far from impossible, to find them all. It was perhaps in my power to destroy the whole project, especially if we lost the war, which seemed increasingly likely after Stalingrad, and if this chemical that they were using was obscure enough, it might be possible to eliminate the entire world's supply. Thus, I could shut the door on whatever unholy creatures these madmen were attempting to unleash. Yes, I could do this. At least I could attempt it. I felt now a distinct sense of the entire world's history resting on what I decided to do next. Surely moments like this did not come about often. Surely they must come only to men who are worthy of them. Surely. 49th post. The Old Apple Nullity. There once was a little boy who loved swinging on the tire swing in his backyard. It was a simple swing, made from an old tire and a length of rope tied to a branch of utter non-existence. On many a lazy summer afternoon he would while away the hours swinging back and forth under the shade of the big leafy existential nullity. And in the fall he picked apples from it. One day his father told him to cut down the apple nullity. "But Pa," he protested, "I love that old nullity." "Mind what I say, boy," his father said. "I don't like ontological paradoxes, and I don't like you sassing me." So the boy ran crying to his mother. "Ma, Pa said I have to cut down the old nullity. Say it ain't so." "I'm afraid it's for the best. The other day when I was weeding the tomato patch, I saw Sammy the cat had gotten into the nullity. When I was trying to get him down, I accidentally gazed into an infinitely branching timeline of events that never happened and never will happen. Well, I'll be darned if that old Sammy didn't jump right on my head. But Ma, what about my tire swing? Come now. There's all sorts of other things you can tie your tire swing to. What about one of the many giant flayed demon penises that grow abundantly in our world and provide our lumber? But Ma, I don't want to swing on some dumb old demon penis. You just say that because you haven't tried it. Now mind your paw and fetch an axe. The boy got his father's axe and went to chop the non-thing down, but after a dozen swings he found his hands were red and sore. The axe's demon penis handle was quite rough. He called to his father, "Pa, this darn demon penis handle has got my hands all scratched to tarnation." "Boy, don't you have any sense? Why don't you wear some gloves?" The boy put on some gloves, but his hands were already quite scratched. At the end of the day, they were covered in blisters, and the tree still hadn't fallen. He worked the next day despite all the pain and finally brought the non-being crashing down. "I'm mighty proud to have you as a son," the boy's father said, tussling his hair. "I guess it's true what they say. The nut doesn't fall far from the demon penis." 50th post. Hair cocoon. I could tell it was going to be a hair cocoon before we even opened it up. They have a smell like a mix between a barber shop and an ass crack, which is distinct. They occur when the hair growth regulators in the hygiene beds go awry. At this point, I had not been a readjustment specialist very long and still enjoyed the feeling of standing back in my white lab coat while the technicians did all my mucky work as I once had to do. This was how I saw the trajectory of my life, moving farther and farther away from the dirty work. When I was discharged from the Marines, I was very proud of what I had accomplished and fully determined never to get myself involved in bullshit like that again. So I went to school and became a bed tech, went to school again and became a readjustment specialist. Eventually, I hoped to become one of those high-dollar panty sniffers at the Halcyon Psychomotor Clinic. 1,000 coins an hour. Not bad. So I was standing there in my spiffy jacket while the working Joes opened up the bed. I was pretty sure that there would be little need for me today. We were pulling out a 33-year-old woman who had gone into the bed at age 9. This was approaching a record. The younger a person is when they go in, the lower the likelihood of viability. Even if she had gone in at age 20, spending a full 24 years in the bed made that viability unlikely. But at age 9, it was almost certain that she'd be a gibbering smear. The technicians lifted the lid on the bed to reveal a nest of black hair. Guided by the glowing ER outline, they started working through with scissors, cutting around the shape of the sleeping figure until her yellowish limbs were revealed. She was emaciated, but fortunately the soft, moisture-wicking hair had prevented any sores. She had a medium mixed American complexion, which would turn into a deep bronze color if she ever went into the sun, but now was the color of yellowed cardboard. They finally removed the mass of hair that covered her face and wiped away the various crusts that caked her head holes. The typical eerie agelessness of a long-term patient was especially pronounced. For a startling moment, it seemed as if she was still 9 years old. She was especially short and bony, but as I came closer to her, I was able to see those indefinable signs of age that let me know that she was indeed an adult. "Hi, Karen. Can you hear me?" I asked. I was required to at least attempt to communicate with her, though the odds of her being able to comprehend basic face-to-face conversation were essentially 0. "Hello, friends," she said in a faint, creaking whisper. Her eyes still roamed, unable to fix on anything. "She talks," one of the technicians muttered. The other technician, who was taking a blood sample, turned and strode out of the room. "Is that you, Ben?" Karen asked. I was surprised by this. She knew my name. This was supposed to be a black awakening, a spontaneous, involuntary disconnection due to some physical layer disruption in her hygiene bed. She shouldn't have known my name. I'd been assigned to her less than half an hour ago after she had been disconnected, when she was just lying in a dark hair cocoon. "Ben?" she called again. Her eyes stared blindly at the ceiling. "Yes, Karen. I'm here," I said, trying and failing to sound reassuring. "Can you come closer to me? I can't see you. I'm scared." I stepped closer to the bed, the smell of the foul hair becoming more intense. Up close, her face looked positively inhuman. "I'm here, Karen," I said, not knowing what else to do. I began the standard speech for a responsive occupant. "You've just been disconnected from your feed. You're still in a hygiene bed. My name is Ben. I'm a readjustment specialist assigned..." "I know all this. Come closer." Something in me resisted. I didn't want to get any closer, though I'd seen and handled occupants who were much worse than this. There was something eerie about this one talking to me, with the face of a child and the voice of an old woman on her deathbed. Still, my entire job was to be psychologically reassuring. I couldn't afford to seem the least bit off. I stepped closer and put my hand on the hygiene bed. We were instructed to touch the occupants as little as possible, as they were unaccustomed to actual physical contact. "Are you there?" she asked. Her skin had an unreal plastic quality. "I'm here. How are..." "Come closer. I want to feel your breath on my face." I wondered if I should comply with this request. It was very odd. Frankly, I was a little unnerved by it, but I figured, what harm could this wasted little creature do to me? I leaned toward her, letting out a small, shaky breath. The woman's mask-like face became a blissful smile. The pupils wobbled within the rims of her huge, glistening eyes. "Listen," she said in the faintest of whispers. "You must help me." "I'm here, Karen." "A moment ago, one of your technicians placed a small pellet in the skin of my forearm. Within 10 minutes, the pellet's wax coating will melt and release a cardioplegic into my bloodstream, stopping my heart. You must cut it out." Oh, intrigue. I like walking that path. What happens to our thoroughly disgusting protagonists? Keep listening to find out. Till then, my wildlings, stay scary, remember to wear your gloves, and make the most of your nights.